everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Wes Nichols. Wanted to introduce you to my friends and panelists here that hopefully will enlighten all of us on what's happening in the area of marketing, customer experience, and technology that virtually every company on the planet is now starting to invest in. So maybe we just go down the line here and just do a quick introduction and talk about your business.
All right.
Sound good?
Good to be here. Thanks for having us. This is, by the way, the best part of the day because Wes is moderating.
No, please. Low point.
My name is Armen Adjemian. I am a co-founder and CEO at DISQO. DISQO is a customer experience platform that allows organizations and brands to understand every customer and every interaction across their entire customer journey.
I'm David Christopher with AT&T. I ran the wireless P&L for about the last 4 years. I was CMO for the wireless business for about a decade, and I'm currently running business development for AT&T.
And my name is Tasso. I'm founder CEO of ActionIQ. ActionIQ is a customer data platform. We help big enterprises connect their customer data and then use it to drive omni-channel customer experiences.
Perfect. And Wes Nichols, one of the partners here at March Capital, recovering marketing industry guy. My partner, John Vane, and I started a company called MarketShare, analytics company that we exited about 4 years ago. So I've spent a lot of time, about 30 years, in this area of the marriage of marketing and technology and the deployment of AI. Just for a quick preamble, what we're talking about thematically today is think about how marketing used to operate. If you see, I think McDonald's in 1979, and they put TV commercial out, and people running go get the McRib or whatever, and then they know that their marketing worked. And now you've got Instagram and TikTok and social media and everything else that just completely muddied the water in terms of the ability to know whether things are working or not. Combined with that, we now have consumers having tools in their hands. Hopefully most of you all have a mobile phone, so that would be a good thing. But now we can now connect, consumers can now connect to brands when they have a problem. That is a new thing. Like, has anyone actually complained to a hotel or airline or something on Twitter or some social media? I mean, by the way, it is the best way to get things resolved now because they actually don't even have to call the 800 number anymore. You just put it on Twitter and you'll hear back and they'll solve it. But we all have a voice now, which is, good or bad. But as it relates to brands, it's made it much, much more difficult. And so that's been a big piece of the investment thesis at March is how do we start to invest in companies that actually build this technology stack that every company on the planet is building or will need to build to deal with this, to deal with allocation of budget, to deal with measurement, to deal with identity, to deal with communications and customer care. You probably heard of Unifor or ASAP earlier. All those feed into this thesis. ActionIQ is a CDP, or customer data platform, that we'll be talking about. DISQO is solving for what happens when cookies go away. That's a huge problem in this industry, and cookies are going away. Armen's been building a company that solves for that, and is being rewarded by pretty insane growth. And then David's been the guy who, of all the CMOs I've worked with around the globe, is the most enlightened. And I'm not saying that because he's here. It is the most enlightened, most analytically minded chief marketing officer that actually understands revenue and P&L creation. And it's unusual for chief marketing officers, and that's why he's done so well at AT&T. So it's great to have you all here to talk about this topic, and hopefully that's somewhat along the lines of what you were expecting to talk about today. So,
Thank you, Wes.
All right, perfect. Maybe start with you, David, if you don't mind. Like, what you've been in, you've been at a transactional brand. I mean, one that actually has to build a brand while at the same time you can actually acquire subscribers, you can retain, you're cutting churn, upselling and cross-selling. That requires technology. How do you sell that internally? I mean, that's a hard thing to do.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks, Wes, and it's good to see everybody. Thanks for letting us talk to you. It's changed a lot over the last, I'd say, decade. About a decade ago, or a little bit more, we formed an analytics group. We called it analytics at the time, and it was a bunch of smart analysts. And over the decade, we grew it into a real robust data science group. And, we currently have in the group, I looked it up before this, we speak 31 languages and we code in 36 languages. But everything in the 4 Ps, if you will, deploy analytics in a pretty robust way now. You think about how we market, whether it's econometrics, whether it's last touch attribution, how do we effectively spend and measure these huge budgets for a brand like AT&T? All of the data that flows in and out of our website and how we think about closed loop marketing and the ability to upsell and the ability to manage that customer online. That's how we market. How we sell, even where we put a store. We have literally billions of attributes that go into where we put a store, measuring, demographic pattern flows, commerce pattern flows, our network performance, competitive performance, on and on. So that's an important element. Where we build the network, obviously. And then another one is customer care, you mentioned it. Customer care is so critical, but just an example of where we're spending quite a lot of intersection of technology and customer experience is matching the right rep to the customer with the right problem. And so, that makes a huge difference in the ability to not only resolve the issue, but end it with a positive NPS score or a good churn outcome, or hopefully, perhaps a revenue upsell outcome. So in every element, we're deploying technology, and it's getting so much more sophisticated.
And are you owning that budget? Or when you were a CMO, were you owning that budget to build that, or how do you balance that with the CIO?
Sure. So we own the budget for the marketing spend. We own the revenue creation and the P&L management. What we invested in technology on behalf of the business. The other teams we partnered with, but we own the budget.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's where I've seen it work best. I was on the phone last week. I was called by a CFO of a large public retailer who was just asking some advice about this, and she told me that 40% of this is a big retail brand that we all know, 40% of their sales is now e-commerce for the first time, and they're trying to figure out how to use these analytics to figure out what stores to keep open, knowing that having a store in a certain area actually has a halo effect benefit on e-commerce sales for people to go in and touch and feel things or to return things. But understanding they're not even looking at the retail store anymore for sales for itself. They're just looking for it as a way to help embellish the e-commerce sales. So that's a big shift. And think about the technology that this company's had to invest. And I think part of the first step is getting the foundation in place, which is really what I think the ActionIQ and Tasso has been building. So you want to talk how you're some examples of how you're seeing the fundamentals of technology?
Yeah, sure. I think people have been trying to do personalization for a long time, but in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, it has become a lot more urgent than it was before. I think COVID was a huge catalyst, right, for this, because suddenly you couldn't afford to have your business split by channel, right? That's the big shift that happened in COVID. That pre-COVID, you had your stores team was here, and then you had your digital e-commerce team here, and then you have your third-party channel, resale, wholesale here. COVID just collapsed everything together, right? Now you have the same person that before were dedicated mostly to a single channel, now crosses everything within the same day, potentially.
Which is how customers shop anyway.
Exactly, right? And COVID just accelerated, and it forced companies to face the fact that you can't just split everything by channel anymore. So you had 3 or 4 things that came together. I think one is you had to go omni-channel very, very quickly, especially when COVID hit, because digital and physical came together violently, right, with a lot of violence and speed, which is a great thing, right? It was a great thing that it happened, but it happened much more quickly than any business was anticipating. The second thing is people started to think, how do we do more things in real time, right? Because once you have to span, the store's experience was something that you would plan over weeks or months. But the digital experience, the moment someone clicks on a link on your website, you know more about them that should inform the rest of their experience with you, right? So it became a lot more real time. And then the third thing is people started to think, how do we go from one to many to one to few, right? If you're a business and you have 50 million customers, right? You cannot be running 100 campaigns. You have to be running 10,000, 100,000 campaigns. You have to have groups of 10, 100, 1,000 customers that you're talking to in a highly personalized way. And all of that drove the need to centralize customer data, right? Because data is the fuel, right? Is the intelligence. I mean, we talk a lot about data science, analytics, the skills, the languages, right? All very important, but AI is garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't have the data, you can get the smartest people in the room, and they're going to come out of it with trash, right?
Or you're not asking the right question.
Yeah, you're not a rush question. You're getting, you're getting a lot of precision, but it's fake precision, right? It doesn't. There's no data there. So with COVID, so just to summarize, right? So with COVID especially, you saw a lot more focus on how do we centralize all customer data in one place in a way that's easy to consume. How do you go from one to many to one to few? How do you go more real time in terms of customer experience? And then how do you go more omni-channel so that you can send, the right message, the right person through the right channel with the right frequency, right? But do it in a way that was never done before. And so ActionIQ and CDP, we help with a lot of these problems, right? But this is not just a CDP thing. It's a very broad market shift that happened. It was dramatically accelerated in 2020, 2021, and it's really a very exciting time and space to be in.
No, and I think you've assembled, in addition to March, Sequoia, and Andreessen as your three primary investors,
Mm-hmm.
and
Exactly, yeah.
and everyone's very excited about the progress you're making. I think they've been able to become the leader in the enterprise version of CDP. There's CDP that just gathers the data, and then there's CDP that pulls the data together and has an analytic layer on top of it that does the next likely action, and that's the space that you own. That's much more value add.
So when people say CDP, they usually mean 2 or 3 different things. Sometimes they will take a data lake or a data warehouse, right, like a Snowflake or an Oracle, and they'll put a whole bunch of customer data there, and they're going to call it a customer data platform. And that's a very partial solution, right? Because the question is, what do you do with all that data? And that's one problem when, because it's great if you have the business leading with IT, you always have great outcomes. But I've seen, for example, IT sometimes just focusing on collecting a lot of data in one place without thinking how that data is going to be used. And that doesn't end well. Because
and it's expensive.
It's expensive, and also what data you're getting there, what's the format of the data, how the business is going to access the data. These are questions that you have to think up front. Otherwise, you end up wasting a lot of time and resources only to discover that some of the data is there, but not everything you need it, and it's not in the right format. But people today, some people will call that a CDP. That's very incomplete. That's like 1/5 of a CDP, right? That's like a bucket of fuel, but there's no car, right? But you still have to go somewhere, right? So how do you put a car around the fuel to get to your destination? And that's kind of where we come in to bring, the analytics, the structure, the interface, the business access, the connectivity to all the channels, the activation, the channels that create the customer experiences. So CDP is a little bit more of a vague term, but there's a lot of excitement about it because people intuitively understand that they need to do more around customer experience. And so that is creating a ton of demand, and it's great to have the opportunity to educate customers, right? So even if prospects come to us with a different definition of CDP, we always have a very fruitful conversation that usually ends up in us having some sort of an opportunity with that prospect.
So we should all buy stock in the companies that are using this and avoid the ones that aren't. So
it's a good predictor of performance.
Seriously,
yes,
it's been a really good predictor. So, and I think you've got a lot of data, first-party data, coming together as a brand. Like AT&T has you know who your customers are, you know what their behavior is, you know they're on your app, you know them, they call a call center. But what about prospects? What about people who aren't already your customers? And that used to be able to be solved by cookies, which are the things that track your behavior on a phone or on a website. Well, Google and Apple, in their effort to continue to create walled gardens and to make it more and more challenging for others to exist in the ecosystem, are turning off cookies. It's called the cookie deprecation or cookie apocalypse, I think, is the other short term for it.
There are a few terms.
Yeah, exactly, and others some X-rated terms too. But it's really screwing up what brands find as an essential element to knowing their customer behavior. That's really what Armen's been building at DISQO, and I think I'd love to maybe talk about that because it's changing the game.
Yeah, and I think to step even more back, I think we're, as I'm hearing these two gentlemen speak, I think what's really happening is there are two major like global trends, which is every business, every individual decision maker is becoming a lot more data driven, right? It is no longer, right, most boards, most C-suite, most leaders expect their teams to use data as a foundation for decisions, right? Which is what's driving, the CDP category growth and various other platforms. The other really kind of macro trend is that I think every customer, every brand is becoming a lot more customer obsessed. So you want to know who your customers are, what they think, where they shop, what they buy, what they watch, what they listen to. And the combination of these things are what's being really used to make a lot of marketing decisions, go-to-market sales strategy informed and whatnot. Mm-hmm. When we started, I think our kind of premise was that we wanted to really connect brands with consumers directly. And we keep talking about we're kind of we see ourselves as like the Tesla of the CX space because we own everything from the battery all the way to the dealership. And what that allows us is it allows us to really have consumers who are kind of in a consented manner, right, sharing information, whether it's sentiment, whether it's advertising data, whether it's digital behaviors like search and site visitation, app downloads. And all of those things connected with identity now allow us to connect how people think and how they behave connected to a marketing campaign or some sort of a third-party event. So as IDs and cookies go away, the only real outcome or the only one big avenue that's left is really identity-based models, right? And there are a few identity-based models. And cookies and IDs have been used for activation, for segmentation, for targeting. And a lot of these ecosystems are breaking up. They're breaking up, and you're seeing a formation of different kind of networks, like publisher networks or private networks, that are really going to be I think, the new kind of winners or of this cookie deprecation or ID deprecation that's happening.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we were excited about when we saw DISQO at first was, many companies, like think about Nielsen or other companies, they have survey data that you can indicate. Like, when you check out of the Fairmont, by the time you get home, you'll have emails. What did you like about your experience? And yes or no. And it was,
already got it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yesterday.
Qualitative. It's like giving you a chance to give you an attitudinal feedback, but it doesn't give you the behavioral. Like what people say is very different what people do. So what they figured out how to do is build a technology that gets people to opt in to agree to let their phone and computer behavior be observed. So we can actually see if someone's on CNN and they see a Lexus ad, we can see that they were exposed to that. If we could see, or let's say it's a iPhone case or something, I was exposed to that, and then I Googled it on Amazon, and I Googled it, went to Amazon, put it in my shopping cart, and I bought it with my Amex, and it's on the way. They can observe all that and all that behavioral data. So that replaces what we have historically used cookies to do that. So, and the large sample, 500,000 people using that, opting in are actually getting rewarded and paid for sharing that. They're right. They're for the first time being given the chance to make money on their own data, which is something I get really excited about.
I think what's really important, it's I think what's classified as zero-party data, right? First-party data is if you're an e-commerce platform, for example, you get to have this data about your customer, but the intention of how you use it it was given to you for a different purpose. Zero-party data is really allowing you to use data in a permissioned way for a specific use only. Mm-hmm. And if you ask general consumers, right, many are highly privacy-centric, which means they don't want to share anything. But many are also comfortable sharing, as long as they know how it's being used and for what reason.
And there's benefit to it.
And a significant portion of it say, right, they believe that data is valuable, and they want to monetize it. These are kind of the larger trends that are happening, and I think DISQO, as we build out our entire platform, we're starting from the consumer and then building the processing analysis, the visualization of this entire platform all the way to the brands.
Yeah, by the way, 85% of all of us have opted out of Apple when on your iPhone when you ask if you want companies to track. 85, it's gone from 100% being tracked to 85% not being tracked in a year.
Yeah, and Android just started that this year, so within probably the next 12 months, you'll see similar trends there.
Yeah.
And if I can, I think this is a fascinating topic, right? So if I can add how we see the deprecation of cookie, because we have we sit on a slightly different point, but I think we also benefit. But at a very high level, what's happening with all this death of the cookie because of legal and technology is that the customer acquisition cost has gone up tremendously, right? Tremendously. And that's doing a couple of things. The main thing it's doing is that it's moving dollars, and I'd love to hear your perspective, David, right? Because you've been on the practitioner side. But from what we hear from our customers, dollars are moving away from media spend into other things, right? So what are those other things? One is solutions like DISQO, right? But the other thing is, what do you do if you have a much higher customer acquisition cost? You try to mitigate it, right, with technology like yours, or you invest more in lifetime value. And that's the massive macro trend, right? That is, dollars are moving away from customer acquisition and more towards lifetime value. What does lifetime value mean, right? It means retention. It means making more money out of the customers you already have. How do you do that? You do that more with first-party data, personalization, retention, NPS, right? Investing in your customer support and service to make sure customers are happy. Because once a customer leaves, it's much more expensive to get them back. And then if you already have the customer, you have so much more data, so much more opportunity to communicate with the customer that, it's just a no-brainer, right? So dollars are moving away from media and from all these platforms. I mean, I don't know if you saw, I was watching CNBC this morning. Snapchat got completely hammered, right? Because all this kind of like Snapchat, Facebook, right? Snapchat was down, I think, 25-30%. Facebook is down 10%. These are all signs, I think, the implication of this phenomenon, right? Maybe it's not, I mean, there's obviously a slowing economy, but a big part of it is there's less ways for these companies to add value because cookies are going away. You can't personalize, you can't target, you can measure, and that is having ripple effects. And I think companies like, us are benefiting tremendously. I think we just started on that trend. I think that trend is going to continue for like 10, 15 years. Before it actually flattens out, is my personal prediction.
Yeah, I mean, look, spray and pray marketing is dead, and
thank goodness.
The benefit of focusing your efforts on retaining your customers and keeping them happy, it's much cheaper to keep a customer than acquire a new one, and it benefits you in so many ways, and so that is exactly the trend that's going on. It's customer lifecycle and it's lifetime value management. Those two things. The other thing that's interesting is, back to data, is just the democratization of data that's happening with, big shops that have a lot of it. Is how do you federate the data such that you can have, this idea of citizen data scientists that low code, no code, with the right question and with the right upfront work, you can actually answer fairly narrow problems, but do it in a way where you can solve problems. And that's a very interesting trend and one that we're spending a lot of time on.
Yeah, and I think to David's point, it's within those teams, but also how do you democratize data across the entire org? How do you break silos, right? Across product teams, innovation teams, marketing teams, strategy teams, because these are all teams that are at the end of the day making decisions daily. And you want them to use their internal data or external data that is directly from customers instead of shooting from the hip. So I think what's interesting is really how kind of the democratization of data, how as you build infrastructure internally and build platforms, but then how do you break these silos across orgs where you're actually letting your marketing team, for example, or your product team to have access to certain internal data in order to prioritize the next 5 features. Right? And then how do you do that in 24 hours?
Yeah, I mean, how you make the data accessible at scale is a real problem. And the ability to unleash it in ways that actually solve problems. I mean, where you started, crap in, crap out. If you're asking the wrong question and you're unable to get the data, then, or you don't understand what you're getting, then that's a problem too.
That's a huge problem. Yeah.
It's the whole, you own a mall and your data is telling you that everybody in the mall is worth 10 million bucks. Well, that's not accurate. You probably have a billionaire walking around the mall.
Exactly.
I didn't make that up. That's
so it's very true. So one very specific example of where ActionIQ helps, for instance, is the data science teams are very important, right? But one of our goals is, okay, you have a business person that wants to create a new audience, right? A new group of customers. So do something with it, right? A new campaign, a new insight. How can you do it without asking a data scientist to do it for you? If you're a business user, how can you do audiencing completely self-service, right? Which historically hasn't happened. Historically, you had people, and if business want to do anything with the data, they have to ask someone, open a ticket, wait for a week, somebody would pick it up, write a whole bunch of SQL, send it back to the business. The business would be like, oh, what was that I asked about last week, right? They don't even remember. It wasn't exactly what they wanted. You have to do this 3 or 4 times. It takes a month to get a group of customers with certain characteristics, right? I'm not joking, right? Especially in big, and I'm sure you've seen it, right? Especially in massive enterprises. So there's data, there's people, but then there's self-service automation, right? The no-code, low-code. So no-code, low-code, when it comes to customer experience, means how do you do self-service segmentation? How do you ship and try new things with your customers without having to go through analytics team? That's a huge part of our business. I mean, we're called the customer data platform, which makes you think, oh, these guys are connecting data. But we're really about enabling the business without having to rely on coders or analysts, right? That's kind of the core of our value prop. And that gives you speed, right? It gives you speed, it gives you agility, it gives you all these things that you need to do if you want to be a modern enterprise that doesn't have to wait a month to do a trivial thing about your customers.
The joke
your
used
customers.
to be 2 weeks and $10,000, that there was always an internal charge when you had to go to IT to get some report run.
At least.
Yeah, and now that's much more inflation. It's much worse. But it's...
There's inflation too.
Yeah, I mean, just you can't act like... When you're competing with Amazon or other firms that have this figured out, and they're on real time, always on, always listening, you're screwed.
Well, and to be fair, what Amazon is doing, they're just hiring engineers to do marketing, right? Which is not really very scalable, and you would argue they're not the best marketeers either, right? But they can move fast, and they can break things, but they can move fast, and they're definitely something to take seriously.
They also have a tremendous amount of data.
Yeah, and systems to process that. Yeah, very true.
They don't have to be perfect.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, one of the things that Amazon's working on right now that I understand is we'll start being shipped product that they predict that we would want, that we aren't placing an order for, but will just appear at our door because they have enough data they can predict what our next likely purchase is literally across their platform, and then we get to return it if we want to return it for free, or we keep it. And when they have the infrastructure set up, so watch your front door, Porch Pirate's dream. So
that's terrifying. My family already thinks that everything from Amazon is free. It just shows up.
Well, yeah, exactly. This auto ship. How about AI, David? What's been your experience on how do we automate more of this? I mean, because it feels like it's still clunky.
Yeah. No, it's very clunky. I mean, it's still in the domain of the group of data scientists or the group of the highly skilled analysts, and it's back to this: how do we democratize it in a way that smart people can deploy templates and tools to get with, there's probably an 80-20 rule or a 70-30 rule that I can self-serve. And we're doing a lot of that, but it's very, we find we're still having to be our own system integrator for it. And so, and I don't know how we really get around that, and that may be okay, but we've got to figure out a way to do it more at scale, and then also do it in such a way that you architect it right, and then you can deploy. It's sort of the, if you're asking the wrong questions and you're giving people a bunch of templates, then that's a bad outcome. You're getting a bunch of insights that are potentially 10 degrees off, and then we go try to action against it. So so conceptually that's one. But the other thing I've found is that the more narrow you can be in terms of what problem you're solving, the better outcomes we get as a business. So back to the idea of where do we build stores? If we're making that fairly narrow in a given geography with these X amount of parameters, and then we can use data science against filling in those parameters of, complex machine learning on things like commerce patterns that, the marketeer or the store manager or the field general of that market, they don't have to know all of that. They just have to know that, we're smartly looking at patterns of commerce, patterns of traffic. We know where our competitors are, and we're making, data-oriented decisions, and we're actually behind the scenes going and using ML and AI to attack that problem. Then it's fairly contained. Where we get in trouble is we try to solve too much with very complex questions or very complex problems, and the data science is not there. You get 50 different variables times, billions of data attributes, and it gets to be very hard.
Yeah, in fact, if you deal with a lot of data scientists, they'll tell you the less attributes they have, the better the models, right? So it's like, how do you simplify the data?
Yeah, more data, simpler models. Yeah, whenever someone talks about AI, I'm reminded of the joke that goes like, humans make mistakes, but you need AI to really screw up. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. The way we approach AI at ActionIQ, like one of the main things we think about is how can you have the human in the loop, right? Because to David's point, I completely agree with what you said. You try to solve too much with automation, it's going to be a disaster. But you can have very intelligent, like if you take the customer experience overall, moments of that customer experience, if they're AI driven, can be very successful, but then you need humans to make sure that, the whole thing makes sense, it's aligned with business objectives and decisions. So we think a lot about how can you take algorithms and somehow present them to humans and allow them to make decisions or drive experiences where these algorithms are part of it, right? The algorithm is not the whole experience, but it powers part of the experience. And you have an easy, simple interface so that humans can review, validate, control the whole thing. So I think for me, AI is more about combining algorithms with humans together and making it easy enough that you don't need people to write code every time you need to change something. Yep. Rather than, like a marketer in the box. Like, I don't believe we're there. I don't, the people that say, oh, this system will do marketing for you. I've never seen this. I think we're like 50 years away, right, from an algorithm running your own marketing. Yeah. But it can make you smarter marketeer. It can help you do a lot more with the time that you have. But then you need a different type of approach from a user interface perspective. Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. It's fairly narrow. If the next best offer for somebody who is on the phone dealing with a particular rep based on what the scenario they called for, rather than have a human try to guess, we're experimenting, but we've seen a lot of success with really getting more scientific about what is appealing to this customer, when and why to present it. And so next best offer takes the guesswork from the rep who's been dealing with a complex problem perhaps, and you got to be very thoughtful about whether you present something or not. And so that's an AI problem, but it's fairly narrow.
Just when they're cooling down, you don't want to go push on something.
If it's a complex customer service call, you don't present.
Right.
Obviously.
I think that one example to make it super practical, I think is Charles Schwab, I think does a very good job at this, where if you're trying to set up a new account on an app on your mobile device and you get stuck, you can call the call center and they know where you got stuck and they can pick it up from there and help you finish it. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about customer experience, something that's seamless across all the touch points that
You
person
don't even need AI for that
No, you
example,
don't.
right? All you need to do is connect the dots, right? And that's another thing, like connecting the dots can go so far before even AI kicks in, right? And it's often overlooked by people. And if you go too sophisticated too soon with not enough data, you're not getting the value you get from, a simple connect the dots type of approach.
Another example, maybe in our business, we have there's a lot of fraud in the telecom industry, in retail. And deploying AI so that the rep in the store doesn't have to make the decision about whether a customer is qualified or not. It's not just credit. It's looking at many parameters to understand is there fraud associated with it, with this, or is it a green light? And you have to do that in milliseconds.
Right. Without alienating the potential customer in front of you.
Doing it tactfully and doing it well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to say I think we use a lot of AI for fraud detection as well because you're dealing with a lot of online consumers and payments, right? So anytime you introduce payments online, your fraud goes through the roof. This is like the old PayPal story and every other fintech probably play. So arguably, it doesn't get you all the way, but I want to say it solves 80% of the issues, and then you add some human element to solve for the next 20%.
And I think those of you who are familiar, since we're sitting in the March tent, those of you familiar with the March investment thesis, and you're starting to see all this fall into place. I mean, between ActionIQ and DISQO, we solved this piece. With ThoughtSpot, we solved the access into data sets. With Unifor and ASAP, we have tools that do these call center optimizations and flows. So, it's been very much part of the thinking of the March portfolio for the last fund, and this fund is finding that technology stack for the 21st century business. So it's only becoming more prevalent. I wanted to, before, in our last couple minutes, to see if there's any questions from the group, anything that we can help address, or... Hi. I'll repeat it for...
As we're looking at data science, our universities of education are not teaching students about data analytics. How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, they're teaching them about, our universities are teaching them about a bunch of other things other than what they actually need to be learning, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, not to get too deep into that, but I think, when you look at, I've spent a lot of time in Singapore, and the way Singapore organizes, what are the 5 macro trends that we see as growth trends? How do we align universities and majors? How do we attract businesses and partners to this country to drive it? So when you graduate, you have a job in those fields, and it's circular. And we don't seem to have that master plan yet. So, but I think that we're hearing, that is the #1 growth area, I think, in data science for people. There's a massive hunger for that. Amazon's opening its new facility in Northern Virginia. I went to school in Virginia, and that school is torquing its majors to generate data scientists to fill these jobs in Northern Virginia. So I think that we need to have a more concerted effort. So how are you all seeing that happen with universities? How do we do better with that? It's hugely important.
So it's a big problem. And we spend a lot of time, one, we can't create them fast enough. 2 is we've got to create nanodegrees and other capabilities that not everybody, you don't have to, the end result doesn't have to be a master's or a PhD to be very effective. And so there's a tremendous amount of upskilling that we as a corporation and others are working on. That's 1. And 2 is, I think, just incentivizing these, not only the universities, but other capabilities to create. And then it's sort of a marketing problem too, right? Having people understand what an incredible on-ramp this is, or platform, springboard this is to many things. You don't have to be a data scientist your whole data scientist your whole life. but it's a great starting place for lots of things.
Tasso,
Yeah,
on the
I-
other hand, you do have to be that for the rest of your life. So
One, yeah, we do. I think it has gotten better. It's still not where it should be. And where we see a lot of the crunch now, both for data science and engineering, is the senior talent, right? Because it used to be so few people would graduate in these disciplines 10 years ago that if you try to find a data scientist with 10 years of experience, good luck, right? So a lot of what we're doing, and I think others are doing, is I think we're trying to get very good at getting more junior talent, right? And then through mentorship, training programs, right? Trying to get them more senior more quickly, which is a fantastic opportunity, right? For those, it's mostly relatively young people coming out of school. So it has gotten better. It's not where it should be. And I think a lot of the crunch right now is on the more senior ranks. That's why you see, some crazy numbers, right? For salaries, like the most senior people in these disciplines, they're making kind of, CEO level compensation, right? It's insane.
it's changing. As if anything is the theme of this event, things are changing rapidly, and we are going to see, Twitter, Facebook, and Snapchat have all just put holds on hiring engineers for the first time in their histories. That's a big change because these people are getting $1 million to $2 million a year contracts just for basic engineers, and that party is over. So hopefully that party is over. So let me go, Mike, and then Melinda. So one of the founders of the Montgomery Summit. So.
How much do you pay your 500,000 soldiers out there to get their data right?
Yeah, so I think we actually we've reversed the model. So you're trying to create a non-monetary value. You're gamifying it. You're actually creating you have to build a business model that scales, right? So as soon as I think you create and make it a one-to-one, you lose that game. That game cannot scale. But as soon as you change that model into some sort of a gamified model, or you add, for example, non-monetary value, like giving tools for individual members to actually access insights, or to ask communities questions, or to be able to share specific trends or whatnot. Now you're changing the whole paradigm of what that value is.
So I have a question. What do you think are the best real-time marketing analytics tools for e-commerce companies, since there's such rising costs with social media marketing? How can marketers cut through that data in a highly efficient way so that they're not wasting probably on average half of their budget, marketing budget?
The question is, what are some good real-time e-commerce tools? And it depends on what
Like data
Data.
analytics that really show you who you're marketing to, not the bots, all of that that's in the marketplace, because I think a tremendous amount of money is being wasted. So how do marketers not waste that money and actually get
Right.
to the people that they want to get to? What are the best tools?
So presumably for attribution, right? So Wes, I think you're the expert.
Yeah, there's one called Market Share.
Yeah, your
John,
company
I
is
know a little
one.
bit about that.
Yeah.
Is the market leader now. But that's for measurement and allocation. But I think in terms of actually understanding customer behavior, companies like ThoughtSpot, which is here this week, that what they built is essentially a Google-like query function that anyone can type in I want to know how many, redheaded, customers I have in the state of Georgia who have bought in the past 30 days. You can spell it out like that, and it will pull that data up and surface it real time. And then that's used and so it's, in that regard, I see that as democratization of the information. So you don't need what Tasso's describing of someone having to go and hire an IT person to go and create SQL code and do that. So I think there are increasingly a number of tools like that. Also, if you're on some of the cloud platforms, if you're on Google Cloud or AWS, there are some new tools that are emerging on those platforms.
It's also a data question, right? So I think you have to ask yourself what kind of data and where you find the data. And you have to exhaust all the data that's directly available to you, and then you can look for third-party data to complement, and then on top of it, you need an interface that's flexible.
Yeah.
Real time can be tough because you don't have time to understand what's going on all the times, but usually it's good to start from the data question, right? It's like, what data do I have available, and what data can I add to have the opportunity to get to the right questions, because most people, you know, they overlook that, right? And there's like all kinds of things. So a lot of times when we talk to our prospects, we end up becoming a consultant for data providers, because we're not a data provider, but we work with all of them, right? And it's a big question, like what data do I need to bring together? How much is in-house? How much is not in-house? It's a big part of the consultative selling that we do to help people answer questions like that.
Thank you. Well, I just, being respectful of time, I think we should wrap it up and let you all have a few minutes break before the next session. But I wanted to thank you all very much for joining, and David in particular for getting involved at a late stage. We had a COVID dropout, and David, who was already going to be in attendance, was gracious enough to join. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Wes.